I'm Exa and I'm 37. I, for the past 7 years, have worked as at a company called Creative Mornings. We build free in-person and virtual experiences that are all community-led for people who identify as creative, which means pretty much anybody. There's like workshops that are all community led. So there's watercolor, there's like build a business, there's everything. There's Friday talks. They're free breakfast, free coffee, and a talk. And those are volunteer led in 200 cities around the world. And there's clubs now, actually, which are more in person, smaller gatherings. And aside from that, I used to work with Karen Brennan at the Creative Computing Lab and on T550, her course, Designing for Learning by Creating. I did that for 5 years and then worked full time with her for 2.5. Um, yeah, and I do a lot of art.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing about you. And it's so interesting, like how like the whole idea of creativity, community, and then making like all of the way you kind of work on all of these spaces. And before I dive deeper into all of this, I would love to start by knowing more about like, do you remember a moment of your life when you thought like, oh, I am creative, or like I loved making something, or like something imagination. It could be some anywhere, like from your childhood or growing up.
Yeah, I think in I always liked drawing and doing creative things. Mostly in like growing up it was drawing, but then in high school I got really into digital art and photojournalism. And those I was like editor-in-chief of the yearbook and I did a lot for the newspaper. So that became a moment where I got to see like art in action in a certain way. And that was really special to me to get to work on teams and realize like that was probably the most like educational part of my education. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's beautiful. And like you had shared this at like at I think LinkedIn or something, is like your question of like how can we make this space feel more human, more curious, and more alive. I would love to know like where that question came for you and like how did you come up with that space?
I think I've just gotten to be a part of a lot of projects that really center the human experience. And I find I've always just been a sensitive kid. And so I've always been wondering like, what's actually happening? Is everyone okay? Uh, and it felt like we were scratching the surface a lot as kids. So I feel very lucky as an adult to get to be around people who are asking those questions, and fueling my interest in those questions.
That's super interesting. And like you kind of work, I mean, you work in a lot of spaces, but like this whole idea of like creativity and human communication and building communities, but you are also like a designer and you create like visual narratives. I would love to know first more about like this idea of like how you turn like complex conversations into visual narratives, and like how do you think like images and drawings make the communication better, where like sometimes words don't kind of
Yeah,
communicate that. Yeah.
that's a great question. I forget that I do that sometimes. When I was 26, maybe 27, I was working on I did a project called, what was it called? It was basically like bringing young people, like high school students, kind of creating like an education program on HIV AIDS with the Harvard Center for AIDS Research. And through that, I met the Global Health Education and Learning Incubator, Sue Goldie, and we were in a meeting with her one day, and I was drawing as she was talking, and it turns out she had like a deep interest in sketchnoting and graphic note taking, so she kind of like invested in me to learn more about how to do that. Um, and it kind of just opened up a whole world for me where I realized like the way that I automatically thought when people were learning, like I've just always taken graphic notes. To me, it's just like creating a piece of art while you're in a class. And it's a way of digesting information and thinking about key terms. It's basically like deep listening, to me. And so Sue, I was so grateful for her for giving me the opportunity to like learn more and read all these books about graphic note taking. And then I got to do it with Karen, in her class, and then just kind of kept doing it. But yeah, I see it as a way of like making a talk non-linear, because you're sitting through the duration of the experience, but you're getting to kind of create a map for people to experience it.
Yeah, I find it like super cool also because it kind of takes you to this journey, which is like
Yeah.
so, as you said, like non-linear, but it also like makes you be in that place of through that art. And I think that I find it very exciting with like visual note taking. And I'm curious, like you also support like a lot of these like workshops, virtual in person, about around creativity and building communities. I would love to know like if was there like a moment which really stayed with you where you saw like a visible change in somebody or over the span of life through these creative workshops and creative elements in their life.
Mm. I mean, I think I can just say like for myself, my own journey like really was I feel like the T550 gave me a language for how I think and for it kind of like gave it was like how I already thought, but it gave me words and I think because of that and because of the sense of expansiveness that that class supported, I was able to go on and do all these things that I've done. So I'm like my own journey to me is one example of that because Karen and the class and the TFs like gave me the ability to see more clearly like what was possible. So I'm only hoping that I can do that for people when I lead workshops too. And I've seen people, yeah, I mean, I guess like my mom is one example. My best friend Erin, I think a lot of my friends will tell me that the work that I do helps them to see themselves as creative when they didn't before, which is an honor.
That's interesting. And like, how do you see creativity as a pedagogical approach? Like, not just like a fun add-on thing of life, but something you like, which make possibilities for learners, or like in more traditional methods. Like, how do you feel like these workshops, these spaces of community support that?
I think that, I mean, at least what Karen's class showed me is like there's just so many other ways to do things. And I grew up in a very traditional education system. It was a great, I went to a great school. I was very lucky for that. And also like even in graduate school, when until I took Karen's course, like I didn't realize like, oh, I could write comics for every paper that I'm supposed to write. And that is just as valid of a resource.
Yeah.
My friend in grad school referred to like epistemological hegemony, which I appreciated, which is like this valuing of a certain type of output over all other outputs. Um, and I just like, I think it's crap. I think it's boring. I think it doesn't get us always where we need to go. It keeps us in a cycle. And I think it has value in and of itself. Like lectures, papers are important, but they're not any more like valuable or so I think when you expand the option of what is rigorous, you get more you get more learning.
Yes, it also makes me think about and wonder about accessibility. Also, like not
Yeah.
everybody wants to go into like reading something, or it maybe like doesn't make sense to them, like as like a visual learner or as some different kinds of learners. Like reading a comic or reading those like complex ideas through art makes it more like sense to me too. And I mean, I'm maybe biased about it, but I definitely feel like I think it reaches different audiences, and I think the whole idea of research is also to not be stuck with like one group of people. So I think
Yeah.
that I love that you also like work in this. You're like a designer, artist, and you create these spaces to kind of branch it out. And like am also very like curious to know more about these learning experiences which like the creative community ideas and spaces which you create. If you would love to like share more about how you think about them, like how do you make spaces for imagination, participation, and like risk taking through these spaces.
Yeah. Oh, that's a lovely question. I think for me it's about Karen taught me a lot about structure and agency. So the like this building an appropriate amount of structure for something creates a sense of agency. So for me it's often like what is the community that I'm designing for? What is the purpose as Priya Parker would always go to first? And then going from there, creating activities and experiences and like thinking about the different dimensions of learning. What are they feeling? What are they thinking? What are they seeing? What are they doing with their hands? How are they sitting? You know, it's like really taking a multi-dimensional approach to imagining the experience of a participant um, in a whether it's a workshop or like a journey, really like mapping that out. I've learned from a lot of awesome people My friend Valentina, who does this thing called Decelera, and my friend Christina, like mapping a user journey or experience journey. I almost forgot the original question. So like,
No, that's amazing. No, I mean, I was curious to know, like, how do you kind of design these spaces which supports users or people to be like imagination, like risk taking, and just be creative in themselves?
yeah, I do think a lot of it is like setting the tone, creating a container, like you had mentioned, um, for creating a container. There's a Seymour Papert quote, like educator, I'm not gonna say the exact quote, but educators create the conditions for invention rather than like providing ready-made knowledge. And I really like live by that. Because I think I don't know what you need to create or what you need to feel or do, but I can create a space where anything is welcome and mistakes are encouraged and there's no right or wrong way. And I think really emphasizing, I've seen a lot of great, Linda Berry is an artist who I love who really overemphasizes like there's nothing, you can't do anything wrong here. And Carrie Smith also, like, she did Wreck This Journal. I'm a big fan of hers. It's like creating spaces where it's kind of counter to the way that we're constantly overthinking and just really making the rules clear that there aren't any.
How these like artful creative learning experiences can be so impactful on life. Like people do often think it's like just journaling or just like a side thing, but I
Yeah,
feel like it really impacts you and like how you reflect on yourself and like how do you make sense of the world in essentially.
it's so crazy.
Yeah, and so like have what have your conversations around this have been with like fellow like educators or like people in your like learning spaces, and how do they thought about it, and like maybe after like having more of these creative experiences, did have you observed any like changes or any like anecdotal kind of conversations you had thought about when they go through these experiences?
I mean, I think a lot of times it is a sense of openness and possibility that people come out with because when you break a routine in any way, like you realize what's possible. I'm just reading, Carrie Smith wrote a book called The Line. I don't know, have you read?
Yeah.
It's so special. And I've had this book for years. I wish I had brought it. It's in the living room. I can always bring it if you want. But it's basically like you're tracing a line through the whole book and it's going through a journey. And I've always had the book because I respect it as an artifact, but I never was like, oh, I need to do it. And then recently, because I'm going on this journey myself of like leaving my job, I I opened it and I started doing it and I was like, "Oh my God, like this is so powerful." This just sitting down in a place in my house and like drawing this line and going through this process with her and seeing what she wanted uh as a teacher, it like broke me open. So for me personally, it's so surprising because you think like just like you said, oh, it's a journal. And I'm like, no, it's a workshop. Like it's an experience. And I'm always afraid to write in books, even though I make things that people can write in. I'm like, I don't want to touch it. But then when you actually do it, it's like such an experience. It leads itself to some kind of transformation
I love
when you're breaking out of your comfort zone. And I that's why for me, all my workshops are always very like tactile. And that's not for everybody. Some people don't like drawing. And I'm like, great, then my workshop's maybe not for you. Cool. You go to that workshop. There's like so many people offering workshops. There's infinite workshops.
100%, 100%. And I love that this whole idea of like non-traditional ways of learning, which is like even though if it's like from a book, like you don't know the author or you're not interacting directly in the sense of like interacting directly with somebody or a facilitator or an educator, but I think this like self-learning experience through this creative journey is also so powerful sometimes, and we often like it's so underrated, like it
So
is so
underrated.
yeah, that it is wild to me. And I would also love to.
I underrate it. I get it.
Yeah,
I was like, I don't
exactly.
need this. This is for other people. This is for looking at. And then once I started it, I was like, oh my God, I see it. I forgot.
Yeah, I think also saying that maybe like also being like not all of them for is for everybody. It's like very like you need to figure out what your way of thinking and learning is. I feel like especially with like creativity, I think it's so like individual but also like grouped, in the sense of like it could be either way for like a person. And yeah, it is very like interesting, and it makes me also think about like building, like this whole idea of building community, especially also because I work in the space of education and arts. Like I always wonder, because I mean this whole idea of doing Why Arts podcast is also because everybody is so like siloed, and like I
Yeah.
feel like this whole idea which you, it's just so unique. Like I've never met somebody who works so intentionally about creating communities in these creative ways. And I think I that's why I'm so hooked to your experiences and like how you bring this all together. And these are like learning experiences essentially for everybody. It's not like you use these creative ways to bring people together, which is so unique and so like needed right now. So
Yeah.
I love that. And have you like what are the like common misconceptions have you seen around like creativity and facilitation, or like common like building communities when you find yourself like unlearning, learning new ways, or like you're talking to new people? What are the challenges or misconceptions you have heard around this space?
Hmm. I think there's so many weird challenges, especially today, because like everybody wants a community. And I'm like, what is a community and what is like
Yeah.
a client? What is, it's like finding the difference between things and figuring out like what does community really mean? I think it's gotten really kind of like blown out. And I don't even know. I'm kind of exploring that too. Um, yeah, what are we talking about when we talk about community? Because it's really being talked about in so many ways. My work is really in like facilitation and learning design, um, and like creating communities in within that space, like micro communities that are um, ephemeral. But it's like, how do I create a sense of shared space in a moment versus over time is very different. So I think the misconceptions are that like you need a community, everybody wants a community, and I'm like, there's only so many communities you can be a part of, um, and that's the only way to create meaning or create continuity. I just don't think that's true.
When you say you see yourself like as like constructionist and like learning designer, like could you share more about it? Like how do you go about being that, like having that role and also then facilitating those experiences? Like what other ways you like what are the pedagogical approach you yourself like take through to design these experiences or think about these experiences too?
I just love playing. Like I think my like happiest place is facilitating experiences and workshops and creating designing, you know, a journey for a participant. That's like where I just get so excited. And I think thinking about like all the weird things that you can do, like my favorite part of working with Karen was being like, okay, we have this topic this week and it's like this, theorist. How do we blend it with like an activity that is hands-on? So I'm like, okay. So I kind of go around, I walk around, and like one time I ran into, I can't even remember what the week was, but it was something about fear and mistakes. So I like had to get keys for my apartment and I went into a key store, and they had this whole bucket of like keys that were mistakes. So then we were like, oh, let's give everyone a mistake key and like make it into a totem or like an artifact that can be meaningful. And so it's just like pulling from everything around you and seeing like how do you turn this into an activity? Um, that's my favorite thing to do.
So I think I love this whole idea of like being spontaneous, but are also intentional about how you're bringing these worlds together and also building that experience for anybody else who goes through it and like kind of like wonder, like pauses and wonder, like what is happening here and why are we doing this? And I think that itself for me is so essential, even in all education spaces, which we often like overlook these things. Um, what do you think if you have to like give, I mean, not like advice, quote unquote, but something like a small shift somebody could take in their like journey of like designing spaces or designing learning experiences for communities or students or anybody else through this like playing, and like how, what do you think could be the first step to being more playful in your learning?
I think just like not being afraid to break the norm and also not being afraid to like do something that doesn't hit. Like you just never know. We would make like placemats about the zone of proximal development, like there's just like weirdest things that you can do. Bookmarks, like just experiment. And that's my approach to community building as well, to anything is like I don't know. I never promise anything. I'm like, I don't know. but this is what I think might work. And then you
Yeah.
iterate and you try a different thing and you see what dimension of it works and what doesn't, and not being afraid to try that. Like I feel like that type of bravery is what I really admire in educators. Um yeah, I'm like I'm thinking of the teachers that I've loved. Like Brad Braxton was one of my div school teachers, and he just like he would have us do we would have to preach on like very sensitive topics around like racism and homophobia, like all these things. And it was just it really took you deeper, but in a safe place. He created a community of respect, and I love him. He's a great educator. So yeah, also like look at the people that you really admire. Like where have you been moved? It might not be in a classroom, but it might be somewhere else, and see what they're doing and like remix it.
I love like all of these like experiences which you're like sharing about. Like to like kind of go towards the end of this podcast, I would love to know more about like how do you think these like learning spaces could be like communicated into like classrooms or education spaces or formal or informal, any.
I think one thing that just comes to mind for me is like adult learning. I feel like the best time I have at museums are always in children's museums. And I'm like why are we not stepping into this more and creating my friend Annie E does these awesome tours at the NGA, the National Gallery in DC, and they're all about like deep looking. And I think just bringing a mechanism of imagination into any adult learning experience as though it was a kid's learning experience is really important. And I think the best things that I've seen have always done that. And I'm always like in awe of people that create that. Um, Annie being one of those people. So I think for me, I'm like, it's really hard for educators to, I think a lot of time, like I used to, with Karen, we did Scratch Educator meetups, which was like designed to support K-12 educators in bringing creative coding into their classrooms. And I got to hear a lot about the challenges of that and also like the benefits of it. And I think creating a space of practice for those teachers was really special because they're kind of working against the grain. A lot of times teachers are like forced to do a curriculum.
Yeah.
They don't have that flexibility. So I like have no wisdom. I don't have wisdom for them. I'm like they have wisdom for all of us because they're doing the hard work, in the classroom. But in terms of museum spaces, I'm like I am always in awe of the ones that can bridge that gap between the adult and the child,
Yeah.
and also like create buy-in. A lot of adults don't think that they should be drawing on the wall. So like how do you make that a real invitation?
Thank you so much. I think that's so interesting to like hear from you about all of these like unique ways of experience building which you work on and playing. Like lastly, why arts or why creativity?
Oh, I just think it's so special for people to get to be human. And I think that arts and creativity, like at their best, help people be human and live more rich and colorful lives. I also just love rainbows like so much. So that's that.
I love that. Thank you so much.